if the data team gets to own this ontology layer and really the modeling thereof, I think the data team is poised to be the next great platform team that really enables all sorts of not only productive behavior that directly measurably gets to end results, which are increased revenues and decreased costs. So just conceptually, and there is a big disruption ahead in terms of a once in a lifetime opportunity for data folks to become the center of this productivity universe that the rise of AI is providing. Welcome to episode 8 of Agentic Data. Robert is noticeably absent today, so I'm going to take you through some news, some thoughts, some synthesis of some important ideas of the week. In terms of consolidation, I think this trend of data consolidation is still happening in the market. Omni acquired Explo this week, or rather the announcement was done this week. And this really brings together the leading player in the BI space, at least in terms of the logical successor to Looker in the Omni folks, and one of the leading players of embedded analytics, which is Explo. And so for those folks who have not been following the trends here or are not quite aware of the differences between the two companies, Omni is really this Looker 2.0 type of company, wherein some of the executives at Looker, which was a leading BI company, the executives who were running Looker's product team and some other functions came out to found the logical successor to Looker, which now is really getting widespread adoption, at least by the companies that we're talking to and working with. And so that company, I think, has been on a tear of some sorts. I think Omni has been quite good at working together with partners and other members of the data ecosystem to very rapidly scale their sales and marketing operations to get to adoption very, very quickly. And so I think it's playing some of the same playbooks that Looker has played in the past to get to penetration. And I think one of the core benefits of being on the Omni platform is that I think it really encompasses and really adopts the new best practices in data, which includes the use of dbt for data modeling. And unlike Looker, I think Omni tries to make the process of doing ad hoc data modeling for the sake of defining metrics and exploring different cuts of the data. And then it enables a seamless transition from ad hoc data modeling to hardening those data models into, say, dbt code or even Omni native code to do end-to-end data modeling within one framework and within one platform. So even if you're a company that uses dbt for data transformations, and then you need a different tool to finalize the data modeling and defining metrics and so forth, you could do all of that within one cloud platform. And so I think that's one of the main benefits of using Omni. And of course, also designs are quite good on the Omni platform. It's new and sleek. Really reminds me of Google Sheets or like a G Suite type of product in a good sense. And I think it's slightly more modern looking than, say, the spreadsheet interface of something like Sigma Computing. So anyhow, I think it's a great product, definitely on a tear right now. And we've also seen this in the market where we are seeing Omni pushing for companies to use Omni in expanding into embedded use cases. In BI, if you're a BI company, there are generally two different ways that company could monetize and the company could help their own customers. One is helping customers in internal analytics, so internal BI, so making dashboards for internal stakeholders like the CEO, the CPO, internal executives, etc. And also, there's this notion of embedded analytics is helping the engineering team build dashboards and data infrastructure to support the customer's own customer. So if the customer is, say, a SaaS company, then that SaaS company probably has analytics that they show to their own customers. So if your platform, say, if you're a hiring platform for restaurants, then maybe, say, your customer is Burger King. And if you're selling this hiring platform to Burger King wants to know how many people are being hired, what does the funnel look like, what are some real-time insights that I could get about the hiring funnel at large. And so oftentimes the engineering team would have to build some sort of data infrastructure, data modeling to show the metrics and so forth. And a lot of the times I think you would start off with, first of all, an OLTP database like Postgres. Your transactional data on the SaaS platform, like the product that you're selling, is likely on some sort of Postgres database anyway. So like the natural extension is, okay, let's just do analytics on top of Postgres. But of course, at scale, this becomes very slow. And so what companies would do is at scale, you would have to switch off to, say, an OLAP vendor like ClickHouse or Snowflake or BigQuery or what have you. And then also try to use a framework that makes it really easy to build dashboards and build analytical products. So that's what embedded analytics is. And I think Explo is completely focused on embedded analytics. And because Omni wants to expand into this embedded analytics portion of their market, I think it makes a lot of sense to join forces with the company that is one of the leading companies, I believe, in this space, at least from like the framework perspective, not the infra perspective. I think on the infra perspective, I see a lot of our own customers and just prospective customers use something like Snowflake or BigQuery or ClickHouse. I think ClickHouse is coming up quite a lot, just because in a lot of sense, ClickHouse it's meant for this type of real-time analytics that is customer-facing, just because of the way that it's architected. It's not generally architected like a general-purpose warehouse like Snowflake, but it does shine in real-time analytics use cases where just quick and dirty queries here and there for embedded analytics use cases really makes a difference vis-a-vis, say, something like Postgres. And on the framework side, I think Explo and there are probably dozens of other companies that are doing something similar. But I think this consolidation would likely accelerate Omni's own plans in trying to eat both sides of BI, the internal BI and the so-called external BI, which is embedded analytics. So I think this follows a trend of just general data consolidation. I think it's especially interesting to see on the sort of the product layer of the data stack. So meaning there's like the infra layer with data warehouses, there's the ELT layer, and there's generally the middle layer. The middle layer has been consolidated with dbt merging with Tran, and that combined entity also owning SDF and Tobiko Data. I think that ELT stack has been consolidated. And then finally, on top of that cake, so to speak, there is the product layer. So that layer that analysts use to create dashboards and data products. That generally is the BI layer. And of course, there are some rare exceptions of companies that are trying to not be BI in the canonical sense, like data notebook-esque companies like DeepNote and Hex and so forth. But generally, I think the vast majority of the money is in general BI, so Tableau, Looker, Sigma Computing, Omni, etc. And so I think it's in data, it's really hard to escape the fate of consolidation and the fate of marketing category consolidation as well, not just the product. But I think one of the scarce things in the market is the buyers, so the customers' mental space in their brains to just allow for different categories to exist. We saw this ourselves, and we were unfortunately, the victim of such optimistic thinking that you could invent a new category as a part of the modern data stack. I think generally, we're going and we're reverting back to the original shape of the vendor landscape in the data stack. So the infra providers, so the data warehouse layer. Then you have generally you could call it the middle layer. So the ELT layer, transformation of the data, and also extraction and loading, basically data integration into databases, and then transforming that data for use later. And then finally, so that's sort of the middle layer. And finally, the top layer, which is, you could probably call this the BI layer. No matter what you do to try to escape that BI labeling and the BI category, I think eventually almost everything just becomes BI if you're on that layer. So that the layer is a destiny. Like where you are placed in this layer cake is destiny. So you're either infrastructure or you're a middleware layer or you're the product layer of the stack. And there's no escaping that. I think we're seeing this. I think there's just too much money thrown at the modern data stack companies, probably due to the massive success of Snowflake's IPO and just like a narrative forming around this is like the new infra stack and so forth. It seems like the experiment is really ending here. So that is cool to see. You need to have some optimism to try to make some changes as part of the stack, but eventually I think it's really hard to disrupt pre-existing categories just because of the scarcity in the buyer's perspective on the mental scarcity of, if I'm going to buy, I just generally want to buy like one part of the stack. Either folks want to buy the whole thing from a single vendor. Like, if you work with Google, then you could buy BigQuery, the infra layer. You could buy, Dataflow, which is like the transformation layer, or you could buy the EL layer from them to some degree. And, both Lookers, like Looker Studio and the non-studio version of Looker, you could buy from Google as well. So that's like a very complete offering. You either want to do that, be on one vendor and just do everything with them, or buy things piecemeal. But it's becoming very clear that even if you're wanting to do things piecemeal, then you do want to buy the entire layer from one vendor, so to speak. Otherwise, things just get too complicated. And I think that's why, at least at our company and some other companies see it too, I think this AI-based disruption is quite important to us, because I do think that another layer on top of the data layer is forming. So even on top of the BI layer. So infra layer, middle layer, product layer, like the BI layer, another completely new layer. I think the intelligence layer is forming. And from a buyer's perspective, from a psychological perspective, I think this opens up a new way for buyers to buy your stack, buy that next layer, so to speak. So I think that's quite interesting to us. And on that note, I think people have tried to build this metadata layer as like the next logical layer on top of data infrastructure. And companies like OG companies like Elation, Calibra, they have tried. Newer companies, Atlan, SelectStar, etc., Sakota, etc. These companies are trying, but our thesis is that there has to be a massive demand shift in the landscape for a new layer to form. And I think there was no massive demand shift to necessitate something like a metadata stack, except for maybe data governance. So data privacy, data governance, etc., data security. That's really the wedge that like an older player like Calibra had. And I think in the name of productivity, name of lineage and data quality, I think this other type of metadata are to form. But it's not clear that the metadata aspect is the way to eat and build that new layer of the stack, so to speak. And I think alternatively, I think another way to sort of eat into that layer is or build on top of that layer, or build that layer, is to use AI as the wedge, as like the really disruptive force that necessitates that type of new layer on the stack. And that's sort of our view there. Okay. So secondly, DBT Labs releases data engineering in Salesforce Data Cloud. This is not as big of a news as, say, some of the other things that we'll be talking about, like all the OpenAI news and so forth. But this is also in the trend of, okay, I think this whole data ecosystem is really, really maturing and being saturated, because I think when you have this data on the cloud, data infrastructure on the cloud narrative really play out, the final stages will look like just embedding your infrastructure just everywhere you can, just to monetize and also to really distribute that product everywhere you can, and looking for all sorts of distribution channels that are not the traditional distribution channels. So traditional distribution channel is to just sell your product directly to the customer, but now you see things like embedded analytics making a consolidation into BI companies. You see that. And also DBT, I think it has a partnership with Snowflake and being able to run DBT natively within the Snowflake cloud. That's like an example of the tail end of DBT monetization to some aspects. Now DBT running directly within Salesforce as like the data transformation layer within this like Salesforce QL. I think it's called like SQL or something like that, Salesforce QL. This makes sense, logical, but seems like this is signifying some sort of the end of hypergrowth and more of saturation. And I think you see this trend also in observing companies like Databricks as well. I think Databricks announced a partnership with SAP, the German software conglomerate. So I think some SAP customers could run Databricks natively within the SAP cloud or the walled gardens of SAP products. That's despite the fact that SAP has SAP HANA and their own data warehousing platforms. But I think we're at a stage where this type of slightly conflicting business development measures could be done just in the name of squeezing out the final distribution channels of the data cloud era. So I think we're seeing that. And of course, with the acquisition of DBT by Fivetran, I think I saw a Reddit post. This is the third thing I want to talk about in terms of data. I saw a Reddit post promoting something called OpenDBT, which is supposed to be a community-owned version, a fork of DBT that is claiming to be open forever. And I think this is a natural reaction against sort of this closed source nature of DBT and Fivetrans merger. So I think we are seeing the end of times, so to speak, in the rapid growth of the modern data stack. And I think we could put a period on this chapter, so to speak. And so I think really the only thing that's left that is going to provide some sort of boost to this data ecosystem is, I think, how AI is going to change the whole ecosystem. And of course, the simple things that will happen is that every layer of the stack is going to add AI native features as part of their stack. And I think that's great. I think pretty much the system of record to some degree of data, and it's a stack as opposed to just pure applications. There are layers of the stack, but like every layer of the stack is going to add AI native features, whether that be code generation or other agentic analytics features, auto-generating dashboards, anything of that sort. Every layer is going to have that. And I think that's great. And perhaps an AI native vendor could go in and really try to disrupt one of the layers of the stack. And I think that could happen. And so you should be on the lookout for, if you were a VC, okay, be on the lookout for this type of a situation to happen. Or maybe, a data warehousing like company that is very focused on delivering infrastructure for AI, like the vector databases or something of that sort, I guess could be a reasonable investment. But that seems a little bit too much like this, like Uber for X type of situation, like maybe lazy thinking. But I think what is not lazy thinking, and I think what we are banking on is the fact that AI will necessitate a new layer of a stack to form on top of the data stack, which we call the intelligence layer. And I think that could be more profound. This is a hypothesis and something that we're working with, that we are predicting. It might not come true, but if it came true, then I think that there could be a lot of value that accrues to this layer. So yeah, some predictions, some hypotheses, and also weaving that into sort of the end of an era, putting a period after this entire chapter. Right. And moving on to more just general AI news and maybe how it pertains to how we view things as it affects, say, data practitioners and heads of data and data executives. A lot of OpenAI news in the past week or so. So first of all, ChatGPT Atlas was released. ChatGPT Atlas is OpenAI's rendition of a browser. It's an AI native browser. And so it seems like OpenAI has finally, it brought some big guns to the knife party, so to speak, in the browser wars. I think Chrome is trying to really beef up its AI capabilities. At least Google likely has plans to. I think Perplexity Comet was one of the first ones that really came up with, it was an AI native company that came up with this AI native browser concept. And I think before that, the browser company, which was just recently acquired by Atlassian, I think it made some strides there. I think with Arc, I think that was like the new browser they were building. And then I think it pivoted into sort of discontinuing this, the first browser and really going AI native into a second browser, which was likely a good move because I think that likely led to the acquisition by Atlassian. I think really, you're going to see some heavyweights like Perplexity, Atlassian, Google, OpenAI really battle things out. And if I were to make a guess here on what Anthropic is going to do, it seems like Anthropic is really trying to zag when everybody's zigging. I don't think Anthropic will try to compete in this market, and it will probably try to zag in the sense of coming up with a new angle to tackle the space. Maybe it will come up with a plugin-like thing instead of trying to own this entire browser category altogether. But of course, I don't know anything about the internal workings of Anthropic. So let's see what happens. But I think just thematically what's happening is I think this let's create our own browser thing is probably a consensus idea at this point for the hyperscaled companies. And I think the more abstract pattern here that I see is that there was some common wisdom back in the day that said, hey, building an IDE is a terrible idea. Like you can't make any money from IDEs. JetBrains has tried, and JetBrains is making hundreds of millions of dollars, but that's probably the only exception. You can't make money on IDEs. Even VS Code can't really make money on that. But of course, with AI, that's generally not true anymore. You have Cursor, Windsurf. You have Devin is not an IDE, but like it rhymes with an IDE. So all these things are at multi-$100 million run rates. So that was a bad idea. Now it's a good idea. I think traditionally investors would have said, and folks who are just sensitive about trends would say, yeah, building a browser is likely not a good idea. It's commoditized. So in the sense of there's Chromium, which is an open source base on top of which Chrome is built. There's so many browsers out there. What's your differentiation? So canonically and traditionally for the past 15 years, building a browser was a fucking terrible idea. But now apparently folks don't think like that anymore. And I think that in part is likely true. And so I think once there is an actual technological platform shift, that is a horizontal shift across every part of the technology landscape, then things that just look like terrible ideas are no longer terrible ideas. And I think that's a more abstract and general trend that we're seeing here. I will end with this quote by Scott Belsky, who was the former CPO of Adobe. I think his company was acquired by Adobe, and then he rose to the ranks of CPO, and I think now he's doing other things. But he said recently, and I quote, "One thing I believe will be very clear in retrospect as browsers evolve. We will have a consumer personal browser optimized with our personal memory, our credit card, our social graph, buying history, and the many agents and apps of daily life. And we will have a work browser optimized for teamwork via a graph of who we work with and permissioning, working across apps, tapping enterprise memory, agents as colleagues, etc. And browser will probably become an antiquated term as this interface becomes the OS itself, or at least far more relevant." It's a very interesting idea. I think maybe this reminds me of how all-in-one productivity tools emerged in the early. And so what I mean by that is companies like Notion and Whimsical and Miro and basically wiki-like software or whiteboarding-like software as the canonical place where all the work got done in your organization, as well as chat software like Slack. And there are a slew of other Slack-like companies that try to become the gravity of where all the work was being done. I think that's sort of the general purpose productivity tool that everybody needs, could be distributed quite easily, like a prosumer motion, like Coda is another one that I forgot. It's a very horizontal product that pretty much the entire 1 billion knowledge workers could use, that has a certain gravity and weight to it. If the browser becomes transformed because of AI, I think the browser has a chance to become the next horizontal workspace for any company. Meaning, okay, maybe there is, let's just analogize as the notion of browsers where, you pull up a browser and all the work you want to do is there. All the context is there inside the browser. Security, permissioning, everything is there. So the way to access any web-based service, which is basically everything at this point in terms of SaaS productivity tools, is through that browser. And because you're the browser, you could very easily eat into the productivity tools themselves. Meaning, if you were a company that wanted to disrupt Notion, let's say, and you wanted to become, among other things, a next Notion, then perhaps what you could do is really win the browser war and become one of the ways that work gets accessed through this browser. And then you could use this point of distribution to then just bundle in basically all the functionalities of Notion for free as part of the browser. And then you could completely destroy Notion because you have a pricing advantage. You just pay for the browser, $10, $20, $30, $40 a month per user. And you have all these services bundled in as a point of distributional leverage. And so that's likely how the browser company, a company that really owns the browser layer, could really fundamentally destroy a lot of companies. It could probably try to destroy a company like Slack as well. Imagine if you had a browser that had basically chat and video calls and, let's say, emails, calendar, and Notion all baked in within the browser as a super app type of product. Pretty hard to fight with that distributional advantage. And all these products all talk to each other. They share all the context, and it's all powered by AI. Quite hard to fight that disruptive change coming from that browser company. So I think there's some certain abstract patterns in which you could use a point of leverage, a point of distributional leverage as your weapon to creatively destroy other companies. And a very good example of this is probably the scariest company is from this perspective is OpenAI, because OpenAI is playing the classical consumer plus prosumer motion that, say, a company like Dropbox or Notion did extremely well in the early 2000s or early 2000s. I think part of the reason why Dropbox currently is still a larger company to some extent than Box, which is the enterprise version of Dropbox in the distributional sense, is because Dropbox really had a distribution advantage in the sense of consumers use Dropbox to store all the data, and then they brought Dropbox into companies, and that really facilitated the enterprise motion. If you were to bet, maybe this pattern would persist. Like Anthropic is pretty much the box of this battle vis-a-vis OpenAI. OpenAI is the Dropbox. It's consumer plus prosumer motion into enterprise. And eventually OpenAI will try to eat into all of enterprise with a huge distributional advantage over other companies. And because how general purpose large language models are and other large models, large deep neural net based models, it could really use that point of leverage and distribution to bundle in products and really disrupt and destroy existing companies in which incumbent companies that occupy the space that a company like OpenAI could almost get for free by the mere existence of itself upstream from all of the processes. So that's a scary thing to think about. And from that perspective, even companies like Cursor and Devin, et cetera, might not be safe against companies like OpenAI, just because AI could, like a general purpose AI company, could eat into the IDE space as well, just as easily given enough time, because it is a contiguous space that is downstream of the space that foundation model provider company occupies. But on the other hand, I think one could argue that infrastructure, if you think of LLMs as infrastructure companies generally are not so good at creating the end applications themselves, especially in an enterprise setting. Maybe they're okay with lightweight prosumer-like applications. But in the history of enterprise software, infrastructure companies like Oracle, even though they tried building like their own CRM systems, Salesforce really dominated there. Data infrastructure companies like Snowflake, they really did try to build the middle layer and the top layer, the BI layer, but it's not really succeeding there. And so you can make that point. But on the other hand, that's quite lazy thinking using analogies. Maybe AI is fundamentally something a little bit different, where like the infrastructure providers can actually innovate on the products themselves, right? So OpenAI is, in some sense, providing the infrastructure and also the application, like in the form of browser. So quite scary. And if OpenAI were to execute quite flawlessly over the next 10 years, it potentially might be able to disrupt a lot of the prosumer-led motions of most productivity software companies, which is quite scary to think about. Anyhow, I think those are some of the chess moves that a founder and executives should be thinking about as you make your next moves. And from that perspective, maybe like sort of the safe spots from a horizontal hyperscaler like OpenAI from an innovation standpoint would be to either completely verticalize into a domain and just really own that relationship, like go after healthcare industry, oil and gas industry, finance industry, go after lawyers, etc. Maybe there's that strategy, and also there could be a strategy of like get to all the enterprise logos faster and do all the custom work and really deeply integrate into the systems before the speed of the distributional advantages that like a company like OpenAI could catch up with you. So some defensive maneuvers that could be protected against sort of this like very scary prosumer led disruptive force that OpenAI possesses. So that's everything in terms of news, in terms of the trends that we're seeing in data, as well as just broader AI at large. And the final thing I wanted to just ruminate it over and think about is just like an extension to this ontology idea that we've been thinking about, last episode and in other episodes. I think if you think about activating and really democratizing data insights out of databases and data warehouses and data lakes and so forth, I think we already made the claim that the ontology layer, so like the layer that translates between the English level queries and the instructions in how to get that data from the data sources in the form of metrics and dimensions and how to slice and dice that data to get back to the user with usable data. So that kind of middle ontology layer. I think Robert mentioned this last episode, but I think there are at least two layers of this cake as well. So if you just observe the ontology layer as a singular layer that sits on top of data warehouses and other data sources, you have the semantic part of the ontology layer. So semantic part being like a extension of the regular semantic layer that is used by BI companies, like basically how to define the measures and dimensions that get you the end product, the end result. That's sort of a narrow view on the semantics. But of course, the broader view is like how to answer any questions about any metrics or any type of ad hoc questions that need to pull from certain columns that may not be metrics or measures, but may be consequential to your answers and so forth. So there are abstractions that you could use to facilitate this semantic acquisition of information. So there's that semantic part of ontology, but I think more exciting part on top of that is that there is an operational part of the ontology where you could operationalize that data, that semantic information, and that information that you acquired from data sources to activate that and operationalize that into something meaningful for the business. Like if you wanted to pull lead information from a sales and marketing motion and take lead scoring mechanisms out of your data warehouse and then rank order them and then take the top 10 highest leads and then run, say, a marketing campaign, and also at the same time ping your relevant reps to really pay attention to these accounts, and also email something to the CEO describing a summary of these leads on a weekly basis. That kind of operationalization currently happens in a pretty, not bespoke, but in a narrow way, let's say, through platforms like reverse ETL companies that just do that, and they claim to activate this data from a data warehouse back into the system of record, like a CRM. I think if you thought a little bit beyond that, I think you could construct a general purpose horizontal system where you could activate that data and push it to not only push it to other systems of record, which is sort of a more reductive way to think about it, but chain together a series of workflows that could pretty much do anything that you want in an enterprise setting. So Turing complete in the operational sense. In the space of jobs to be done, like you have a framework that is completely Turing complete. You could do anything. That is quite a powerful thing to think about, concept to think about. So I think if you constructed a semantic part of this ontology layer, so semantic ontology, if you had operational ontology in the form of structural definitions that power workflows and agents and agentic workflows, then you could really have a powerful system that could automate the entire space of all jobs to be done, jobs to be done in an enterprise setting. So I think conceptually that is very elegant. And I think there are some precedents here in terms of like establishing an ontology and then operationalizing a business using that, which I think canonically a company like Palantir has purported and put forward in the, say, like 2010s and early 80s. I think that's when this kind of narrative naturally formed. But I think if I were to make a hypothesis here, I think this ontology layer, we want to call this the ontology layer. Palantir called it that. And I think also as someone who was part of building a company that naturally competed with Palantir, which the company was called Quanco back in the day, in the 2010s, this concept is not new, I think, but marketing this and actually getting this to be adopted as a standard has been very difficult, even for Palantir. But if I were to make a small prediction, maybe not so small, but I think it's a matter of time before this ontology layer becomes a consensus idea. Like ontology becomes a next browser type of situation where I think you need to own this layer, whatever you want to call it, this context and operational layer that enables all sorts of English native executions to happen via workflows and agentic workflows. This needs to exist. And so I think in a few years, most hyperscale AI companies will try to go after this to capture the enterprise market, which is the natural ending point for even more prosumer-looking companies. I think no enterprise software company is safe against the massive tailwinds that consumer and prosumer motion companies like Anthropic and OpenAI have. And so I think you need to just see where the puck is going. And as data folks and executives running data divisions, this is something that one must think about and adopt in an enterprise setting, just to be ahead of competitors and ahead of other folks in your respective spaces, and to really leverage that to automate all sorts of enterprise workflows. I think there is a very strong chance, and this is the future that we envision, is there's a chance that the data organization has always been seen as this cost center to some degree. You're making reports and generating insights and so forth, but that's about it. You're not really generating revenue. In some cases you are, and that's how we kind of pitched it back in Quanco, as if you build predictive like pricing algorithms or demand forecasting algorithms, or like ad uplifting models, like you directly have a measurable ROI on your spend on the data organization, because you literally just get uplifted revenue and profits and so forth. Okay, so there are rare exceptions, but okay, data organization generally seems to be thought of as this cost center. But if the data team gets to own this ontology layer and really the modeling thereof, I think the data team is poised to be the next great platform team that really enables all sorts of not only productive behavior that directly measurably gets to end results, which are increased revenues and decreased costs. So just conceptually, and there is a big disruption ahead in terms of a once in a lifetime opportunity for data folks to become the center of this productivity universe that the rise of AI is providing. So I think that is what helps me get out of my bed every day in working with data executives to really fundamentally transform this data profession into a platform profession that enables measurable productivity. And folks have been saying this for years, and this is something we said about if you use like a data notebook product like Hyperquery, you could share your insights better, and then get more visibility and so forth. Okay, that's a very small story in the great arc of history and technology. But I think what we're seeing is if you're a team that really fundamentally owns the most critical ontology infrastructure that powers all your enterprise workflows, I think it's a completely different professional alignment, the professional leverage that one would get. And I think that's sort of the future that we envision here. And we're more than happy to share our progress here and hope to continue this discussion further.